I need to see Eraserhead! There was static for a moment, as the camera swiveled and zoomed in on him in rapid analysis.
You may enter.
Shinso entered the main building and ran down the hallways, stopping for directions a couple times. All the students seemed surprised to see such a young kid with a cat on campus. But they all knew where Aizawa taught and pointed him the right way. Shinso knocked on the classroom door. It opened to the sight of Aizawa looking tired. His tired gaze traveled down to Shinso, and his eyes narrowed.
Why is Eiko a cat?
He demanded, eye twitching. Shinso's heartbeat felt too fast, and his words came out in a rush. She got in a fight. It was my fault. I don't know what to do. Aizawa sighed. The boy was obviously worried senseless.
I want all the details from you later. For now.
He beckoned to one of his students.
Show Shinso the way to Recovery Girl.
It was weird how many classroom seats were empty. Had Aizawa expelled half his class or something? The teen hurriedly got up, leading the way for Shinso. He turned out to be a chatty guy with a wind quirk, and Shinso made sure to walk quickly so that the taller boy didn't slow down. They approached the right room just as Recovery Girl was leaving. Shinso hurried forward. You're Recovery Girl, right? The school nurse raised an eyebrow at the cat. I'm not a vet. She's a shapeshifter, Shinso explained desperately. Recovery Girl looked at the cat closer. Very well, bring her inside. A few minutes later. That's all I can do for her, Recovery Girl explained to the anxious Shinso. The cat was soundly asleep on the table. Most of my healing energy went towards the internal bruising to her stomach. Her other injuries were numerous, but none of them were too bad. What did she do? Roll down a cement hill? Why is she asleep? Healing people takes a lot of energy out of them. Recovery Girl eyed the messy-haired boy as he watched the cat with worry. Your friend is going to be fine. Whatever she did, don't let her do it again. No more vet work. She muttered something about kids being too reckless these days. Aizawa's point of view. Aizawa had gotten approximately 2 hours of sleep today. He'd been up till 1 a.m. planning lessons, followed by a couple hours of underground hero work until 3 a.m. His eyes had closed and he knocked out, only to wake up 2 hours later to the sound of you going up and down the stairs. It was 5 a.m. What kind of problem child antics was this? You'd finally gone outside and started playing guitar, and he'd given up on sleep and gotten up to check on you. School nerves. He hadn't thought you actually had anything to worry about. But that was before that purple-haired kid had showed up at UA, during your school hours, with you stuck in cat form. Then, he'd received a call from your school, saying that you and Shinso had bullied 2 innocent students. Apparently, they had tried to tell you and Shinso not to ditch class, and you and Shinso had responded by trapping them on the roof. They had remained trapped until found by school staff and brought to the principal to tell their pitiful story. Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose tiredly. The school story didn't match what he'd seen. Shinso had obviously only left the school to bring Eiko to him, and the boy had been worried out of his mind. Aizawa's irritation levels were rising steadily. He wasn't sure how many people were to blame here. Either way, it was a mess. How had you gotten yourself into this situation, problem child? Shinso looked up with wide purple eyes when Aizawa walked into the school infirmary. Aizawa ignored him. He walked over to the black cat. You were curled up in sleep, but dreaming fitfully. Your eyes squeezed shut, your fur prickled up slightly, and your ears kept twitching back. Aizawa gently rested his hand on you, and lightly fluffed the soft fur behind your ears with his fingertips. You immediately calmed and relaxed into a more peaceful slumber. Shinso was startled. He'd tried that already, but it hadn't helped. Were you that reassured by Aizawa being there? It was like you'd recognized him just from that. Scooping you into his arms, Aizawa settled into the chair along the wall, next to Shinso, with you curled up in his lap.
So, kid,
Aizawa stated tiredly.
It was then that Shinso noticed exactly how irritable Aizawa looked. Time to explain what happened. Don't leave anything out.
Yes, sir. Shinso bowed his head in shame. Why did this have to be the way that he was seen by the hero he most admired? He told Aizawa about his brainwash quirk, his history with Sano and Kai, and the interaction on the rooftop, which had led to you getting knocked out by a quirk-enhanced punch. Aizawa's glower seemed to intensify as the story went on. So, I left them on the rooftop and brought Eiko here, Shinso concluded. Now what? From the expression on Eraserhead's face, he doubted he'd ever be able to see Eiko again, and he couldn't blame him. I'm sorry, sir, he added, shame spiraling within him.
For what? Aizawa snapped.
Shinso looked up in surprise. Aizawa definitely looked angry. Did he want him to be more specific? I'm sorry for getting Eiko involved with violent people, and for trying to be her friend, even though my quirk only brings trouble. He spoke softly, hating that he had to be so honest. It seemed to make the shame spiraling within him grow even more powerful, and he looked away. Aizawa's eyes sparked with the force of his glare.
Look at me.
Shinso looked up into those intimidating eyes.
Irrational kid. Your quirk didn't bring trouble. You used it to freeze a bad situation, so that the trouble didn't get worse. Don't confuse facts. As for trying to be Eiko's friend, the only reason to apologize would be if you stopped trying.
Shinso's eyes widened in shock. The words felt like a slap to his face, in a way that woke him up from a bad dream. Suddenly, he remembered what Eiko had said. Yeah, I want to be like him. A pro hero? Maybe, but I definitely want to be someone who helps people grow. He could see it now. Thanks, Eraserhead. Aizawa scowled.
It's just Aizawa-sensei here.
Thanks, Aizawa-sensei. They sat in silence for a moment. Shinso spoke up. Aizawa-sensei, why did Eiko shift into a cat? Aizawa glanced at him keenly.
Her cat form isn't her most natural form, but it has the smallest body mass and lowest energy requirements. Whenever she's injured or deprived of food, her quirk activates to shift her to cat form, as a way of conserving energy.
Oh. Shinso was taken aback. He wondered if it had happened many times before. Aizawa seemed really used to you as a cat, although it could just be that he was used to cats in general. You stirred from your sleep, amber eyes blinking open slowly. Shinso watched in fascination as you grew and transformed into your usual self with cat ears, wearing your school uniform. Your amber eyes blinked closed again in sleep. Faint bruises and mostly healed scratches scuffed your arms and legs, especially your knees and elbows. Aizawa brushed strands of your hair back to check your face, glowering as he noticed more scrapes on your cheekbone. He pulled you closer to him, simmering with anger.
For your information,
Aizawa spoke up, not looking at Shinso.
The school believes that you trapped your classmates on the roof when they were only encouraging you to not ditch class. They have probably called your parents to report this incident from the perspective that you were caught bullying others with your quirk.
What? Shinso exclaimed. Aizawa continued to look into space as he lowered his glower, the corners of his mouth pulling into a dark smile. That smile was terrifying.
It looks like I'll have to sort things out with your school.
Shinso noticed the dark aura around his favorite hero and felt very, very glad that he wasn't Sano or Kai. Aizawa's point of view. Over the next couple of days, the principal of your school, Fujimori, had been unwilling to consider any story different from the one told him by Sano and Kai. He'd graciously allowed for Aizawa to schedule a, quote, brief meeting with him later in the week. As the days went on, Aizawa felt sharply aware that he only had 3 weeks before your reevaluation with the social workers. They had made it very clear that they intended to take you away from him, unless he could prove that you were healing emotionally. The fight seemed to have brought everything from your past back to your mind. He'd been up every night this week, ever since the incident at school. Whenever you woke up from a nightmare, your too fast breathing and sometimes crying had been enough to wake him up. He'd always come into your room right away to see what was wrong and to comfort you. After it happened for the 3rd time in the same night, Aizawa had grumpily left your room, only to return holding his yellow sleeping bag. He'd zipped it around himself, and then lay down on the floor next to your bed. "Dad?" Your voice pulled him back just as he'd been falling asleep. He opened his eyes, tired and irritable. "Yes." You were peering over the edge of your bed, looking down at him. "Thank you." You smiled. He'd stared tiredly, then closed his eyes again, sleep overtaking him. The principal of Eiko's elementary school tried not to fidget, internally reminding himself that this was his office and his school. The pro-hero Eraserhead sat in front of his desk, professional in his tailor-fitted suit. Principal Fujimori hadn't expected that. The man who always picked Eiko up from school looked like a hobo. He recognized the same scowl, but it struck differently from someone who looked like a CEO. "I'm deeply sorry that your daughter was involved in this incident," Fujimori explained with finality. "But rest assured that the boy, Hitoshi Shinso, will face disciplinary consequences and possible expulsion for what he did." "And what did he do, exactly?" Fujimori was taken aback. "He brainwashed 2 students, trapping them on the roof, and bullied your daughter as well. Shinso obviously brainwashed her to his side of the fight. As for her alleged injuries..." "Alleged?" Aizawa cut him off, his glare intensifying. "Ah, yes, as for that, we plan to question Shinso more. The boy seems determined to keep lying, and Eiko is clearly too afraid to say anything against him." Aizawa leaned forward. "Mind if I ask some questions of my own?" "Of course not." Fujimori began to feel unsettled by the glint in Aizawa's eyes. "Are you aware that Shinso came directly to me after leaving the school grounds with Eiko?" "You mentioned that, yes." Fujimori's eyes narrowed. "When a student in your school tries to skip class, do they typically head straight to another school?" Fujimori looked at him warily. Well, you're thinking that through. Do bullies go directly to the parents of the student they bullied?" Fujimori flusteredly tried to find a response, but Aizawa wasn't finished. The pro-hero's eyes glinted dangerously. "Eiko was injured. Recovery girl on the UA medical staff has it on her records that the most severe of her injuries took the form of internal bruising from an overpowered punch to her stomach. And, coincidentally, one of your supposed victims has a strong build and a titanium fist quirk." Fujimori stared. "Are you saying you believe that boy? He brainwashed 2 students. My staff are witnesses to that. We always expected something like this from him. He makes the other students nervous, never makes friends, never smiles." "I heard that you got a new superintendent over the school district. Mr. Sato, correct?" Aizawa interrupted. Fujimori's eyes narrowed. "What are you getting at?"
Sato has a reputation for investigating incidents thoroughly. We have here circumstantial evidence and definitive medical records with Recovery Girl at UA. Coincidentally, the evidence supports the story told by my daughter Eiko and her classmate Hitoshi Shinso. Aizawa eyed the principal like a cat deciding what to do with a mouse. If I appeal to your superintendent, Mr. Sato, he will uncover all of these facts. Your lack of investigation would be shocking. And according to his reputation, Mr. Sato's tolerance for incompetence is low. It would be interesting to see what would happen to your position here at the school.
Fujimori stared, mouth open slightly. Fujimori had heard of many principals fired over lesser matters in Sato's old district. How did Aizawa know about that? Would he really go so far as to appeal to the surly superintendent? He saw the answer in Aizawa's dark smile. Not only would he do it, he would enjoy it. His face drained of color.
Are you ready to examine the facts of this incident in a more rational light?
Aizawa loomed overhead. He withered under that stare, fear clouding his mind. Shinso is innocent this time. Sano and Kai told a story that didn't match the facts. Aizawa smiled, making Fujimori sweat even more as he stared up at the pro-hero. Were his eyes glowing red? There's a demon in my office, Fujimori thought faintly. 10 minutes later, Kai and Sano were called to the office and expelled without further discussion. Principal Fujimori sat by himself in his office. His trembling hand made it difficult to sip his coffee without rattling the saucer. He resolved to avoid future confrontations with Shota Aizawa at all costs. Aizawa's point of view. Aizawa mulled over the meeting as he walked to his car. It was the middle of the day. He'd left his class with Mike for an English lesson. It was not a good sign that your nightmares had gotten worse. The fight had turned out to be a strong trigger for your PTSD, and he was running out of time before the evaluation. His mind analyzed and reanalyzed, thoughts racing and organizing themselves as he drove back to UA. He created a plan to help you. He hoped it was enough. It had to be. Your point of view. You floated on clouds of light and warmth. Someone was calling your name. Eiko, it came again, and this time you woke as the speaker nudged your shoulder. While Aizawa was headed back to UA, you still sat at your classroom desk. As a matter of fact, you were sound asleep over it. You yawned and stretched. Shinso had woken you. As much as you loved your window spot, the puddles of sunlight that streamed in always made you sleepy, and even more nap-prone than usual. It exasperated Shinso, but you'd smugly pointed out that it was fine, because he would always wake you up when something important happened. That made Shinso look irritated, but he hadn't denied it. Did I miss anything? You yawned, noticing that many of the students had left for lunch, while the rest headed out the door. Shinso frowned at you. You already know what was covered this last hour, since you understood the homework assignment we did yesterday. But there was something. He frowned deeper. Your ears pricked up as you examined him. What? Sano and Kai were called to see Principal Fujimori through the intercom, and they're still not back. Shinso looked antsy. The school staff hadn't believed their story, and he didn't like waiting for the school's decision of how to punish him. You frowned at Shinso, almost like he'd been doing earlier. I told you not to worry about it. Dad told me he'd set things straight. Shinso bit back his response. He admired Eraserhead as a pro-hero, but your confidence in his ability to do anything went beyond that. Shinso viewed the world more realistically. He'd never been trusted. not by the teachers, nor by the other students. Whatever Aizawa did would probably be bad for Sano and Kai, judging from that dark smile, but it couldn't save him. His fate was sealed now that the staff had found 2 brainwashed students on the roof and believed their stories. He turned away instead, avoiding your gaze. "Let's go eat lunch. Rooftop again?" "Yeah, let's go," you grinned. Once on the roof, you dug into your tuna sandwich, and Shinso picked at his bento. It looked homemade. "Looks good." "Mom made it." He didn't look up. His comment aroused your curiosity. "What's your mom like?" You'd seen her briefly. Shinso always took the bus, but sometimes she picked him up. She'd worn a smile, a uniform that made it look like she'd just gotten off work from somewhere, and a matching baseball cap stuffed on over her spunky lavender-pink hair. It had fascinated you, the way her hair was a pinker shade of purple than Shinso's was. Shinso glanced sideways at you. Your amber eyes looked back, earnest and non-judgmental. His shoulders relaxed. "She's amazing." He looked off into the distance. "She works 2 jobs. She's always tired, but she always smiles, like life couldn't be more perfect. I think she does it so I don't worry." "Wow." You leaned back, impressed. "And what's your dad like?" Shinso stiffened, silent. He seemed more emotionless when he spoke again. "I don't know much about him. Mom doesn't say much." Oh, you felt small. Your question had hurt Shinso. You wanted to comfort him. On a whim, you shifted to cat form and headbutted him gently. He jerked in surprise. You rubbed against him. He relaxed as he realized it was just you. He reached out and scratched under your chin, then chuckled as you leaned into it, eyes squinted closed in cat happiness. You stepped delicately onto his knees and curled up in his lap. You could sense that he was no longer feeling the hurt he'd felt when you asked your question. You may not have the right words to say to him, but you could comfort him as a cat. You stayed like that until Shinso woke you up to go back to class. "How many times do I have to wake you up, sleepyhead?" he muttered. But you didn't miss his ghost of a smile. Aizawa was waiting for you when you got out of school. He seemed a bit more contemplative than usual. "What's going on, Dad?" Aizawa glanced at you, dryly noting your sensitivity to people's moods. He answered, but with something different than what he'd been thinking about. "Sano and Kai are expelled. The school determined that you and Shinso told the truth." You looked up at him, wide-eyed, then flashed a quirky grin. "Thanks so much, Dad." Your grin broadened. "I knew you'd do it, but Shinso is worried." Aizawa raised an eyebrow at your confidence in him. "Let's go home, kid." He started towards the car. You skipped after him. Across the parking lot, a man in a hoodie leaned against the wall and watched. He hadn't checked on you much, ever since handing you over to the low-life drunkard named Taro Teshima. You had grown out into the skipping, energetic kid who trailed behind the pro-hero Eraserhead like a hopeful kitten. His flat stare observed with boredom. All this observation, effort, it seemed like a waste to him. He watched you run up and slip your hand into Eraserhead's as the crowd of students and parents got a bit thicker and more chaotic. You looked so weak, but the boss made his certainty about your usefulness very clear. The man slunk away, deep in thought. So, I got a comment and I want to respond to it. The commenter said that they want a part of the story where Eiko is, quote, bad A. And my response to that is, you will definitely get that. Eiko is not always going to be as defenseless as she currently is. I'm looking forward to your comments. I love reading your guys' comments. Just so you know. Also, that kind of relates to a part of the story, which I haven't brought up in a long time. Remember how in the intro of the very first video, there was a description of your quirk, and part of it was retractable claws? And you might be wondering, how come we haven't seen that ever since then? It was like mentioned at the start and then forgotten. No, it wasn't forgotten. Loose ends are one of my biggest pet peeves, so you can trust that I'm keeping track of all the details, and there will be no loose ends with this story. That said, that will come up again in part 8 of the story. Also, I wanted to make a note about the timeline. So, in the story right now, Eiko is currently 8 years old, and Aizawa is 23 years old. Now, if you do the math for that, you'll see that in 7 years, Eiko will be 15, and Aizawa will be 30. Starting to see where this is going? So, Eiko is the same age as all of Class 1A. If she goes to UA, she would be the same year as them. So, you have that to look forward to, but there's definitely at least a few more parts before the time skip. You'll understand why those parts needed to happen first, once we get there. P.S. When I record the story, I use a really nice microphone that my university has on campus. And then, of course, I forget to do outros, so I end up doing those on my phone. If you notice the audio quality difference, that's why. Very observant of you. Have a great day, and take care of yourselves.